All right, welcome to another episode of NFL Outdated Cover 2 series. This episode, we are talking about the Atlanta Falcons, and I am joined by Miles Garrett from Fox 5 Atlanta. How are you doing?
Doing good, man. How you doing today?
Any day I can talk about football is a good day. We'll just say that.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's off season, but there's always something to talk about with the NFL.
Of course.
And, with the Falcons, it's been an interesting couple of years here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure how long you've been, covering the Falcons or how long you've been a Falcon fan. How long has that been for you?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a Falcon fan for as long as I can remember. I mean, I've born and raised in Atlanta. So my first memory of being a fan of the Falcons was the early days of Michael Vick. That time period per se when he was just sort of lighting the league up. I remember the first Madden I got was Madden 04, the one where he was just basically unstoppable. So that was my first flavor of Falcons football. I've been a fan ever since. I started covering them officially last year. I've known the team pretty well. I've been watching them for as long as I can remember.
Well, with that then, I mean, how has it been then saying goodbye to Matt Ryan?
Yeah, no, that one's been a little tough. He was definitely my favorite player for the longest time. It's tough because for the longest time, I was a big defender of him because a lot of people seem to think that he was the issue with the Atlanta Falcons, whereas I was a big proponent that he was probably the only thing good going for the Falcons for the longest time. Granted, he's not his 2016 MVP self anymore. I think a lot of people can recognize that. But at the same time, I think that, there was also a need for a fresh start for both parties, for Matt Ryan and for the Atlanta Falcons. Matt Ryan needs to go somewhere, and he did. Where he's surrounded by talent and he's surrounded by a team that's ready to win. And I think that he's instantly made the Colts a competitive team. Not a competitive team. I think one that could potentially compete in the playoffs and maybe make some noise there. Whereas the Falcons, they're a rebuilding franchise. I think any casual fan can notice that. It was time. It's just definitely probably pretty hard, granted, given what he did to sort of save this franchise from the shambles that it was after the Mike Vick era.
Yeah. And when you look at it, I mean, if he was, to kind of move on now and almost similar to what happened with Matthew Stafford, if he was to kind of get to the Super Bowl and perhaps win it with the Colts, would it be a similar kind of outpouring with Lions fans and Stafford, or what would the feeling be if he was successful then and actually did what he couldn't with the Falcons if he did that with the Colts?
Yeah, no, I'd like to think that there'd be a lot of support for him. He's done so much for the community here in Atlanta, and I think he's done all the right things. That's the main thing for Matt Ryan. He never did anything to give people a reason to dislike him. But the problem is that this fan base has been so toxic and so split on him. It's almost baffling. People are still talking about him, in a bad way. They're like, oh, it was time to he was garbage, this, that, and the other. I'm like, dude, he's not even playing for us anymore. What's the issue here? I think it's no matter what, people are going to still have that opinion that he isn't Mike. It's funny, one of the biggest criticisms of him was that he wasn't Michael Vick, is that he wasn't that exciting player. A big thing of Michael Vick was that he sort of represented Atlanta. A lot of people saw Atlanta in Michael Vick. Whereas Matt Ryan, he's your pocket passer, not as exciting, not as, he's pocket passer. That's not really the eye candy these days.
Right.
And it really hasn't been for the last 10 years. But, some fans just never got behind that. And I don't think they ever will.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting because national media, I mean, you hear about other, toxic quarterback relationships, Baker Mayfield, things like that. But you never really hear that nationally about Matt Ryan. I mean, it's just, because his image has kind of been, Matty Ice, kind of like the steady personality. Is that kind of why maybe nationally we're not hearing about that?
You're not hearing about his what now?
Oh, just how the fan, the Falcons fans are kind of split and how toxic.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think a big reason for that, like you said, is that the Falcons aren't really a national team that people really, especially since they're not very good right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think if the Falcons were still a competitive franchise, you might be hearing it a little bit more. But for the time being, it's just they're kind of irrelevant, so people aren't really paying attention. But what I do think is very funny is that ever since he's left the Falcons, all I've been seeing online is just praise for Matt Ryan and how great he is at this with the Colts, and how how Manning-esque he's been from Jim Irsay and all this, that, and the other. And everyone's like, wow, he's so much better than Carson Wentz and what we've had to deal with. And I was like, man, I've been trying to tell you guys this for years now. But he's been, and that's another criticism that a lot of Falcons fans have had of him, is that, he's been surrounded by talent his whole career, but he never won a Super Bowl. Whereas my argument was he elevated that talent around him. A lot of people say that Julio Jones made Matt Ryan. I think, you don't have Rice without Montana, and you don't have Montana without Rice. You don't have Harrison without Manning, versus likewise. You got to have one of the other. You don't just have a mediocre quarterback and a great receiver. Usually it works both ways.
Well, kind of moving into what the Falcons have now, in possibly mediocre, maybe something more. What are your expectations for Marcus Mariota this year?
Marcus Mariota is an enigma for me, because I think when he is healthy, he is an average to an above average NFL starter. But the problem is he has never been healthy. So I don't know how to assess him, especially with the question marks surrounding this team's offensive line. That's a huge concern. I think it still is the main concern for this team right now, because the trenches are pretty much their weakest spot on the team, both offensive and defensive. So granted, he was picked up because of his mobility and his familiarity with Arthur Smith, so he can move around a little bit more, maybe avoid some of those pass rushes that perhaps Matt Ryan couldn't, given his mobility. But at the same time, it's just hard to predict what his health will look like, because it's just been so unpredictable his entire career. But I do think his stint with the Raiders was very healthy for him to sort of sit back and just kind of reassess his career just a bit, because I do think he has talent. I really do. I think when he's out there and when he's healthy, he can be very productive. It's just a sort of an unpredictability thing for me.
Now, in the media and, around the team, how did he react when the team drafted Desmond Ridder?
Very, very positively. A lot different than the Ryan Tannehill reaction per se. And I think he expected that. I think he sort of knew what he was getting into when he came here. I mean, he knows this is a rebuilding franchise. He knows what the situation is. He knew they just got rid of their franchise quarterback for, pushing 15 years. He knows what the situation is. So, and he's been very supportive of Desmond Ridder so far. He's come out, and it's funny because a lot of people made the comparison from college that Ridder and Mariota are very similar quarterbacks. Ridder may not be quite as mobile as maybe Mariota was in his Oregon days. In his Oregon days, he was basically unstoppable. Mm-hmm. But Ridder and him are very similar in their play style. So I think that Ridder can benefit quite a bit from what Marcus Mariota might have to offer him right now. But as far as a teacher standpoint and, what his expectations are, I think he's very aware of what he is, because he was brought in on, I believe, a 2-year deal with a potential for maybe like a 1-year out for the Falcons written in that language. So I think he's very aware of what this situation is.
My guy, Ronnie Easton, has a question. Do you see Ridder starting it all this season, or maybe just getting some playing time throughout the games?
Absolutely. Especially with what I've been seeing so far in minicamp. Arthur Smith has been, we interviewed Ridder, I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before. And he was talking about how quickly and how surprising he picked up the playbook. He surprised himself with how much he thought there was going to be a little bit more of a learning curve. Now, of course, he may not be telling the truth. That could be just stuff that he knows we like to hear. We're all aware of that. But at the same time, Arthur Smith has sung his praises quite a bit for how much he's learned the playbook and what he's been surprised, like something that he's not expected to see from rookie quarterbacks and something that he hasn't seen before in some other rookie quarterbacks that he's dealt with at his previous stops. So I could definitely see Desmond Ridder go in, especially, getting him some packages, perhaps just throwing him in there and seeing what he can do. But yeah, my expectation this season is that I think Ridder will take over at quarterback at some point, and it's not going to be due to Mariota playing badly. I think it's going to be because of an injury.
So yeah, because of an injury to Mariota then?
Correct, yes.
And so when you look at it, I mean, you look at even last year, some of the quarterbacks, Trey Lance, in Justin Fields. And the question was always, are they ready? And still is with Trey Lance. Are you having those same questions with Desmond Ridder? Is he ready?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely, we've grown so accustomed to just getting rookie quarterbacks and thinking they're immediately ready to go in the NFL. I mean, I think that's been the sort of the norm for over the last decade now. It's just, you draft a rookie quarterback and they immediately need to be starting. I think we just get so impatient sometimes when we see that new toy under center and it's like, throw them in there. And especially when you see how successful some of these guys have been, some of these rookie quarterbacks in the past. But no, I mean, I don't think, first of all, he shouldn't, in my opinion. I don't think Desmond Ridder should be the day one starter, especially given how much familiarity Marcus Mariota has with Arthur Smith's system. I think he is currently the best fit to be starter at the moment. But Desmond Ridder was drafted to be the quarterback of the future for this team. So they're going to have to get him on the field at some point, but I don't think that it needs to be immediate. I think if there's an injury, of course, he'll have to be thrown in there. But if there's, stagnation at the offensive side, maybe they need a spark, then I am all for throwing him in there. And I think Arthur Smith is too. I don't think he's going to be afraid to throw him in there because, I mean, I think at the end of the day, he'll never say this, but I think he knows what this team is right now. They're not a playoff contending team at the moment. They're rebuilding. They've got some young potential that they have on this team, but at the same time, this isn't a team that many other teams are afraid of at the moment.
So it's interesting you say that, though. I mean, they were pretty close last year. I mean, with everything to the playoffs, weren't they?
They were for a long part of the season. They were, and again, I'll credit that to a very weak schedule they had. Their schedule was not good, admittedly, last season. And I mean, hey, I'm going to throw in another plug. I said it was a big reason because of that was Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan was keeping them in some of these games, especially with how atrocious that offensive line was. It was brutal last year, and again, I'm hoping it'll be a little bit better this season. They were on the cusp last year, and I think they'll be a little bit better than people give them credit for this year. Like I could be wrong, of course, but I don't think they're gonna be like number one pick bad. I think they're gonna be, probably. I think their draft position next year will be pretty close to where it was this year.
And kind of with that, I mean, what is the pulse of the Atlanta fans? I mean. Is there, a little bit of they know they have to be patient now? I mean, what's the pulse there?
I would say surprisingly, I think that the pulse is patience for once. Now that I think that Matt Ryan has been traded, it's sort of become an acceptance now. It's like, all right, like we're rebuilding now, finally. Like it's now, we've been sort of teasing around that topic for the last 2 years, sort of, after Julio was traded and then some other pieces started going away and being traded and let go. But no, it's funny because immediately after the 2022 or this past draft, everyone was already like, all right, 2023, what's it going to look like then? Because, there's some pretty popular picks next year, including quarterbacks. I mean, Desmond Ridder, it's going to be an interesting discussion next year because of how deep the quarterback class is going to be. But besides that, I think the big thing that Falcons fans are looking forward to is the fact that this team will finally have money to spend next year. The last few years, this team has been in apps. I honestly don't think a team in NFL history has been in more cap hell than this current Falcons team is right now. It's just been brutal with the contracts and the guaranteed money they've had to pay guys like Matt Ryan and Julio Jones and Desmond Trufant and Devontae Freeman that they're still paying currently. It's just all these huge deals that Damas Dimitrov gave these guys to keep the core together after that Super Bowl run that, they're sort of paying the price for right now. So all that comes off the books next season, and they're going to have just a bunch of money to spend.
Yeah, I guess my question then too is, is the cap? I mean, is it real? Because I mean, you got some of these teams.
Ask the Rams that.
Well, the Rams or even the Saints too. I mean, they were pretty bad, and just the maneuvering. Obviously, it's kicking the can down the road. Eventually, they're going to have to, pay the piper, and it seems like the Falcons are at that point. But with you kind of rebuilding and stuff, they had the draft. Talk about some of the players that maybe are going to play an impact here in 2022 and beyond from this draft.
I think they got a lot of starters in this draft as opposed to, last year, I think we're going to see a little bit more of the guys that they drafted because I think a lot of them sat on the bench as more of a learning year last year outside of Kyle Pitts. But this year, I think you're going to see a lot of day one starters. Obviously Drake London is immediately wide receiver one. Arnold Ebiketie, he's going to be AK-47. I like his nickname. He's going to be a starter. Troy Anderson, most likely going to be a starter. Tyler Algier will most likely be your running back. I know they use Cordarelle Patterson pretty frequently there, but I don't think they want him as their primary running back. And because at the end of the year last year, you saw him sort of wear down from that role. It's tough for him. He's a big guy. His primary position has never technically been running back. He's always sort of been that Deebo Samuel type player-ish. I think he was finally just used properly in Atlanta for once. But Tyler Algier, I think, has a lot of potential to be that starting running back. He fits the mold of sort of what Arthur Smith's looking for, that, ground and pound, short stack, giant, just really between the tacklers running back. And I think it'll be a lot better for Cordarelle Patterson to sort of become that change of pace guy again, to where, you don't really know what's going to happen to him in the backfield. You don't know if he's going to be coming in for a running play or if he may come in for a pass play. I think that's what they want him to be. And he's a little bit on the older side too, so they don't want him to get some wear and tear. But also, D'Angelo Malone, of course, Desmond Ridder, we all know the story there. Obviously Ridder was drafted to be that replacement. I actually think Justin Schaefer will be a starter by the end of this season.
Wow.
Just solely because of, I watched a lot of Georgia football this past year. Being in Georgia, I've seen a lot of these guys, John Fitzpatrick, of course. And there's a reason Georgia won the national championship. They're playing the best competition, every single week. And again, this is a weak point for the Falcons on the offensive line. He was brought in to compete, I believe, with Caleb McGarry, and who's been very much a disappointment after being a first-round pick. So we'll see how he plays out. But yeah, at the moment, I see a lot of starters from this draft class.
Yeah, when I was looking at the draft in the last two picks, I almost thought that it's almost like when you're kind of lazy at the end of the day doing your homework, and you're like, oh, I'll just kind of throw in a couple people that are players that are close because they're both in Georgia. Like, oh, I guess we know them. But Schaefer and Fitzpatrick are going to be solid then, not just kind of like throw-ins at the end of the draft. Yeah,
I'm not quite sure about Fitzpatrick quite yet. I am pretty hopeful. Again, he's a later round pick, so you never really know, what you're getting there. Yeah, Schaefer is definitely a guy I've got my eye on. And it's funny, going up to a guy like Troy Anderson. He was a dude who originally I was very disappointed in because you had a guy like Nakobe Dean still on the board. And I was like, what are you doing? Like, who is this guy? He's from Dakota, like
Montana State, I believe.
Yeah,
right?
It's Montana State. Excuse me. It's like, why are we drafting this guy when we've got the Butkus Award winner from Georgia still on the board right now? But at the end of the day, I think I've seen what the Falcons want. They want to get bigger. That's the main thing with this draft class and free agency. They've gotten just exponentially bigger. They were a very small team last year, and they're looking for size and speed. And Troy Anderson fits the mold on basically all of that. He runs like a deer, and I think he's pushing 6'4", 6'5", as a linebacker. So dude is giant. I mean, he played quarterback. He's played pretty much every position you can imagine in college. So he knows a lot of positions. I think he played little wide receiver. He played quarterback. Oh, wow. He's done a lot of things in college. So I think they did like him for his versatility.
Well, speaking of wide receivers, I mean, you talked about Drake London stepping in right away. I mean, that's a big ask, isn't it?
It's a big ask, but at the end of the day, I think he is expecting that. I mean, he's the first wide receiver taken in the draft class. I think he knows you look at all the other receivers taken in the first round too. I think a lot of them will be pushing for, a number one spot as well. You look at Chris Olave, and maybe not a number one, but with Michael Thomas, but his injury history has been iffy pretty lately. So, you never know if a guy like him will have to end up being a number one receiver. But, you look at a guy like Garrett Wilson, he'll probably be a number one receiver in New York. But regardless, yes, I do think Drake is expecting to be that wide receiver one guy, even if it is by default. But they did bring in quite a few players to sort of compete. The Falcons wide receiver room is loaded right now. Like it's basically like a mini team right now at the amount of guys they brought in just to compete for that position, 1 through 4. It's kind of nuts, honestly, the amount of guys they brought in for that room this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, I was just kind of looking at, Brian Edwards. I mean, he was supposed to be, he was supposed to be really good in with the Raiders. But yeah, why do you like him so much?
I like him because, number one, he fits what Arthur Smith's looking for. Again, he's looking for these big guys. I mean, if you look at the current slated starters for the Falcons, everyone is like 6'3" or higher. Like, I mean, you got Kyle Pitts, who's 6'5". You got Drake London, who's like 6'4". You got Brian Edwards, who's 6'4". Auden Tate, 6'5". I mean, all these dudes are just giants. But I was a big Brian Edwards fan not Oakland, Las Vegas.
I was
watching him there. I just really liked. I didn't think he was used as well as he could have been used per se. And again, I trust Arthur Smith as a coach, so I think he's going to use him the right way. And right now I think Edwards is your wide receiver too for this team. I think he fits that mold of doing that. I think they want to put him in the slot a little bit more. I think he's a very good slot receiver, even though he is giant. But I think they're going to try to use him in a variety of different ways. They've been kind of teasing a bunch of different packages, at least in mini camp so far. So I'm kind of excited to see how they use all these guys.
Yeah. What about Zacchaeus?
Zacchaeus to me is at best a number 3 receiver. I like Olamide Zacchaeus. The problem with him is he became your wide receiver 1 last year, which is a problem. If Olamide Zacchaeus is your wide receiver 1, then you are not a good football team. Before last season, I would have said Olamide Zacchaeus is a wide receiver 4 at best. But I mean, he did come in, he stepped up. I think for as much as he could step up, he stepped up last year. For the longest time, he was kind of hovering, trying to make the team. And, you can't expect a guy like that to be, replace Calvin Ridley above the depth chart. But no, after what he showed me last year, I would be perfectly okay with him being in like a slot guy or coming in as a wide receiver 4, which I think is very plausible now, given the guys they brought in. You have Drake London, you have Brian Edwards. I think that Auden Tate and Damiere Byrd will be competing more for that wide receiver 3 position, perhaps. And I also think Frank Darby is going to take on a bigger role this year. He kind of was buried in the depth chart last year. He was kind of a draft pick everyone sort of forgot about last season. But I'm expecting him to take a big jump this year. So it'll be interesting to see who's cut and who, makes the team this season, because that'll tell you a lot about positioning and who's going to be where.
So fantasy wise, who do we trust? I mean, is it just Drake London and everybody else?
Kyle Pitts.
Okay, Kyle.
Story. I think this is going to, again, it's hard to say a breakout season after he broke the rookie tight end record. And was setting all these rookie tight end records left and right last season in Kyle Pitts. But I really do think he's going to take off this season. I think I'll be really bummed if he doesn't score more than one touchdown like he did last season.
Right.
But I think that was mostly due to triple team coverages he was facing week in and week out, being the only weapon that they had on offense last season. But no, Kyle Pitts is 100% my pick for a fantasy type because of Arthur Smith's love affair with tight ends. He loves it, especially with the offensive line struggles that this team is expected to have and the rollouts that I'm expecting the quarterbacks to be doing. I'm expecting Kyle Pitts to be the safety net for Mariota or Ridder quite a bit. So at the end of the day, I think he's going to be having a load of receptions. I think his receiving yards will be on pace, if not more than they were last year. Because let's face it, he's not a tight end. He's a hybrid. He's a tight end that's built like a wide receiver. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, I'm expecting a big season out of him. I will be very disappointed if we don't, because I think he is just the Megatron of tight ends. I tweeted it out the other day. I think he is, just this freak athlete that we've never quite seen at a tight end position before.
So, yeah, where would you rank him among the tight ends? He's up there, obviously.
I would put him top 5. I think he has the potential to be number 1, of course, but I'm not ready to put him number. You got to score more than one touchdown for me to put you in, that. Like right now, I wouldn't have him as elite, even though I have him at top 5. I would put him at just the cusp of it. Once he starts scoring these touchdowns, then I'll give him that elite status. I need to see the touchdowns.
And a lot of that can be dependent on the quarterback as well. Is that something you're going to be kind of watching in, camp and everything, just how he connects with Mariota?
Yeah, I'll be noticing that. They've been, the Falcons at least have been tweeting out, some stuff of him and Mariota. It's funny, all the highlight catches I've been seeing of Mariota from minicamp of Pitts from minicamp have all been passes from Mariota. So I don't know if that's a good sign for chemistry's concerns, but I'd love to see some of those from Ridder as well. But early return so far, it looks like him and Mariota are starting to develop something a little bit.
Well, you talked about Arthur Smith in his offense, and I'm not sure how, if you're old enough to remember the Arthur movies. I am. I guess that dates me, but Arthur 2 on the Rocks is the sequel. So talk about the genius of Arthur Smith and why you like his offenses so much.
I like his offense a lot because I think he utilizes what he has. To me, last year, it was a weak schedule, but the Falcons had no business winning as many games as they won last year. Just watching them week in, week out, it was just a very, very talentless team, for lack of a better word. There just wasn't a lot to work with. And granted, a lot of people were like, he should be better. You have Matt Ryan, you have your franchise quarterback. Yeah, I credit it to more of the national people seeing it online. It's like, they have Calvin Ridley, they have Matt Ryan, Cordarelle Patterson's a breakout fantasy player. Why are they losing all these games? It's like, you're clearly not watching this team right now because they have nothing in the trenches, no offensive line help. Mike Davis was a huge disappointment last year. So basically it was Cordarelle Patterson carrying the running game. And you had no wide receivers. Olamide Zaccheaus was your number 1 guy. And Kyle Pitts was basically, like I was saying, being double-teamed, triple-teamed every time he went out there because he was the only legitimate threat. So I do credit a lot of that to Arthur Smith. I think that, maybe there were some games where there was some questionable decision-making, and I'd say maybe it had to do with, just some play calling is concerned. But I think that had more to do with the talent that he was working with, or maybe the lack of trust per se. And, where you want a run to happen, he wouldn't call a run because, you look at the pass protection, or maybe he'd call a run and you'd be like, oh, well, that's because these guys can't block worth a damn for Matt Ryan. So, it was funny because I remember distinctly after the difference from week 1 to week 2, the changes in play calling, because in week 1, when they lost to Philadelphia, the passing plays, it was a lot of him, dropping, a lot of Matt Ryan dropping back, trying to check progressions. And I think he got sacked like 6 times. Like, it was ridiculous. He got sacked an ungodly amount of times against that Eagles pass rush.
Mm-hmm.
And the next week, almost every pass play was a check down. It was like screen plays. It was, slants. It was very, very quick passes. Like Matt would drop back for 2 seconds and throw it. I was like, okay, Arthur knows what he's working with right now. He knows that Matt has 0 time to throw, so he's going to just do captain check down at the moment.
So, yeah, I mean, you talk about a coach that's able to evolve like that. I mean, I'm a Bears fan, full disclosure here. And, this year I'm not expecting much in 2023. There you go. But, yeah, it's when you look at it, though, I mean, last year they threw Justin Fields out against Cleveland, and they didn't, do anything to, with that offensive line. They're, Jason Peter, they were trying to do the wrong things with the wrong personnel. And
Mm-hmm.
and obviously that's why Matt Nagy got fired. He just didn't know how to use personnel, offensively. So Arthur Smith, obviously he has done something right with, you talk about a lot of less talent, but even, with Cordarelle Patterson, I mean, the Bears weren't able to utilize him, and even Bill Belichick wasn't even able to utilize him. So are you ready to say that maybe Arthur Smith is better than Bill Belichick? Are you there yet?
Absolutely not. I will not claim that quite yet. Although I think it's fair to assess that Bill Belichick hasn't done anything since Tom Brady left, and his drafting has been abysmal. But that's neither here nor there. I do, like I said, I am a fan of how Arthur Smith has utilized some of these guys. And it honestly does make me excited to see how he utilizes some of the guys he brought in this year, because last year, Cordarelle Patterson was that guy. So this year I'm excited to see, like, okay, who's the next guy? Like, who does he utilize next year, now that we have a lot more pieces to play with now? Before it wasn't, you didn't have as many gadget players to really work with. Like, is Drake London used in some cool packages? Is there a new, cooler wide receiver route for Kyle Pitts? Like, do they throw him in the slot maybe? And like I said, and even Tyler Algier. I mean, I don't know too much about Damian Williams yet, but I've been watching a lot of Tyler Algier. I'm excited to see what they do with him. He seems like a lot of potential for a red zone back. And like I said, that 3-down back that you don't really see as much in the NFL anymore because of the sort of 2-back system a lot of teams use. But I am excited to see how he utilizes the more, I'm not going to call it influx of talent, but more talent that's on this team.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it, I mean, with the running backs, I mean, Cordarelle Patterson, he's probably the only one that's kind of, relevant this year, early on, but then maybe moving more to Tyler Algier kind of later on the season. I mean, they're not going to like throw everything right at Tyler Algier like right away, right?
I don't think they will, but I also wouldn't be surprised to see him not taking starting reps, but at least being a guy that is switching out with Cordarelle Patterson in week 1. Like, they're flip-flopping a bunch of guys going in, like Damian Williams is in for a couple plays, Tyler Algier is in for a couple plays, CP's in for a couple plays. So, like, I wouldn't be surprised if by week 1 we're already seeing that. Like, I don't think that's going to be something we're going to be waiting mid-season to see. I think it's going to be happening pretty quickly.
When you look at the other side of the ball, then what are some of the key players that need to step up for them to at least, see some improvement in 2022?
For me, it's 100% Richie Grant. He was their 2nd-round pick last year, and he was, I don't want to call him a disappointment because defensive coordinator, I'm blanking on the Falcons defensive coordinator name, Dean Pease. There he is. I was for the longest time last season, we'd ask him all the time, why isn't Richie playing? He was never playing. It was you would come in, every now and again. But I mean, he's your 2nd-round pick. You're expecting to see that guy make an impact pretty quickly. But it was an issue of playbook because Dean Pease is a very complicated scheme. So, he was a guy that needed to sit down. And that's what I go back to that whole concept of, maybe some guys need some more time than others. It's okay to not be thrown in there immediately. But that being said, they got to do something now. It's year 2. You've had a year to learn the playbook, but I do think we're gonna see some good things out of Richie because the Falcons have been marketing the crap out of him and Jalen Hawkins out there in the secondary, and I don't think that's an accident. I don't think they'd be doing that if Richie's going to be back on the bench again, and they're like, oh, here's the cool new secondary. We're going to tweet about him every single day. But No, I mean, I was very excited to see Richie play when he was drafted. I think there was a lot of potential that he had. He's a ball hawk. He hits pretty hard. We just never saw him last year. He was just always kind of learning that playbook. But I do think it is a make or break year for him. The secondary, at least I think in the safety side, is a pretty weak point for the Falcons as it currently stands, because AJ Terrell is an elite cornerback. Casey Hayward has proven that he can hold it down on another side. And I'm also a big fan of Isaiah Oliver. Isaiah Oliver was having a very good season last year until he had his injury, which was funny because I was a huge Isaiah Oliver critic prior to last season. I always thought he was a liability out there, but I don't know if it was Dean Peace's scheme or something, but he stepped up big time last year. And prior to that injury, he was playing at a very good level, and having him as your cornerback 3 as opposed to your cornerback 2, I think could make a huge difference if he comes back fully healthy.
Yeah, it's interesting, how teams and players use social media now, and it almost seems like the Falcons are trying to make fetch happen with Richie Grant and Jalen Hawkins, because ESPN has them listed behind D. Marlowe and Eric Harris, and so obviously the team sees something in them to market them. Would you see the secondary kind of as the maybe the weak part of the defense, like overall, because of that? Or I mean, what do you see as the weakness in this defense?
It's funny because I actually think, at least from the cornerback side, is the strength. I think it's arguably their best position at currently. Just because of how good AJ Terrell is and my faith in Casey Hayward. I think their weakest point is it's what I've always said. It's just in the trenches for this team. They have never had a pass rush. Even when they went to the Super Bowl, they never had a pass rush. It's just it's baffling, this team's inability to find someone to get to the quarterback. I think the last time they had a legitimate threat was John Abraham, because I mean, I won't even give it to Vic Beasley. Vic Beasley got really lucky in 2016. But yeah, I mean, Grady Jarrett, bless his heart, he gets double teamed every time he's out there because they know there's no one else, to threaten the quarterback in any way. They brought in Lorenzo Carter this year to potentially be that guy to put some pressure on the quarterback. But it's still sort of unknown. That Arnold Ebiketie, he was another guy. A lot of people wanted the Falcons to go pass rush in round 1, but they didn't. A lot of those main guys were sort of off the board by the time the 8th pick rolled around. I was a big, Jermaine Johnson guy. I thought he was going to be the guy. He ended up falling quite a bit, so maybe it would have been an overreach at 8. But yeah, I mean, I was team pass rush for pick 8. So we'll have to see how that goes. It's a lot of unknowns there. For how the pass rush will be. I also like Ade Ogundeji. He was a Notre Dame guy that was a pretty productive rookie last year for them, who did some good things. I know he's more of an not as much of a pass rusher maybe per se, but he did create some problems last year. So we'll have to see how that goes. But
oh, did we lose you? Yeah, it's interesting with the Falcons here. I'm not sure if you can hear me here. Yeah, when you look at their defense, and you look at some the rest of the division, it's going to be interesting to see. Obviously that pass rush. It's going to be interesting to see. The development of some of those rookies. Maybe we'll see if we can get you back here soon here. When I'm looking at some of the expectations, it'll be interesting to see within that division. I'm not sure if you can hear me. I'll kind of bring you back in here. Can you hear me again? Oh, we'll see if we can get him back. But we look at those Falcons. That's interesting defensive analysis on that. I think when you look at the rest of the teams in the division, they're gonna need to obviously have but when you look at it, okay, let's kind of go through here some of the teams. Obviously, you've got Tom Brady in the division. You're going to have Jameis Winston. So those are going to be the top 2 teams. I mean, they're going to be throwing. Panthers, we don't know quite, what what's going to happen, there with the quarterback position, whether Baker Mayfield's going to be there. When you look at it, all right, it looks like we have you back. We have you back?
That
Awesome. Yeah, when you were talking about the defense, and I was just kind of looking at, some of the other teams in the division. I mean, pass rush, against the Saints and the Bucs is going to be key, isn't it?
It's going to be key, and I don't see how they're going to do it, especially, with a team like the Buccaneers, who I think their offensive line is one of their biggest strengths. Guys like Tristan Wirfs and all those guys they got protecting Tom Brady. But they're going to have to. That's the only way they're going to win games. I mean, you can't keep a secondary out there, covering guys for 6-7 seconds every single play. I mean, at some point, the wide receiver is eventually going to get open. They're going to have to do something to alleviate the amount of time some of these quarterbacks are having back there. There was a funny tweet that was actually released, I think yesterday, maybe day before, showing how much time Josh Allen had in the pocket when they played the Falcons last year. I mean, he just dropped back and he could have done cartwheels back there. It was just nothing, no threat whatsoever. So, they're going to have to figure something out.
I feel like that's the latest meme, and you just keep adding like things that they could do, like eat a sandwich,
put a lawn chair, whatever you want back there.
Put the laundry in, all that stuff. When you look at the rest of the NFC South, how would you rank the quarterbacks?
How would I rank the quarterbacks? Okay, well, obviously Tom Brady won. And then after that, it gets really interesting after that. Because, you really don't know who could be the quarterback for the Panthers or the Saints, give or take. You'd think Jameis Winston is the quarterback for the Saints, but they brought in Andy Dalton. They have, I think they got another guy this year too. I know they have Ian Book back there as well.
As a Bears fan, bringing in Andy Dalton doesn't mean much. So,
yeah, if we operate off the fact that it's Jameis Winston, I guess we'll put him at number 2 by default because he's been to a Pro Bowl and he's shown glimpses that he can be a good quarterback. It's just the interceptions have always been an issue with him. I think you can put Marcus Mariota at 3. I think he has an argument for being 2 when he's healthy.
Mm-hmm.
But at last, I'd definitely put Sam Darnold or whoever ends up being the starter in Carolina.
What if Baker's there?
If Baker's there, then I would put him at 2.
Yeah, I'm
actually a Baker fan. I think Baker is a decent quarterback in this league, and I think Cleveland has always been trying to run him out of town.
Yeah, I think the market for quarterbacks really shrunk. They can't bring in Jimmy G. That's just not really much of an upgrade.
Jimmy G is less mobile Marcus Mariota.
Got to make a T-shirt about that.
Yeah, he'll win you some games, but he's only good for maybe 6 games, so you never know.
Well, when the schedule came out and you looked at it, and obviously everyone does this and kind of says, well, this is a win, this is a win. What are your expectations as far as win-loss, projections or at least hopes?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to project, but because it's all, there's always teams that show you something that you weren't expecting to see. So I'd like to think that the Falcons are going to show me something that I'm not expecting to see, coming out of the gate, because this offense is going to look so different than it has been. There's going to be so many more packages for play action and just straight up running plays for the quarterback. That's never been in the playbook for this team. Desmond Ridder and Marcus Mariota can do that. They can move. Matt Ryan could not. So you have an entirely different dimension of the playbook that has now been opened up. So I'm interested to see how that looks before I start projecting win totals, but I'm not going to be boring. I'm going to, I think that at the end of the day, I'm going to call it a 5-7 win team right now.
And that's okay. As a Bears fan, I try to, be an honest fan, as well. And there's so many holes that the Bears have to fill. As a fan, I'd like to see them win this year. I don't think it's going to happen. I would rather see them win long term. And I think when you look at the Falcons, if they're set up long term, do you see the Falcons kind of maybe being set up better than, say, the Bears or the Jaguars long term?
That's hard to project because I think Trevor Lawrence is like the closest thing we've seen to Andrew Luck since Andrew Luck. I think he got such a bad rap with Urban Meyer in year one. Trevor Lawrence to me has been, I think he's got a Hall of Fame trajectory if he gets the right coach and all that kind of stuff. I think he's that good if he's surrounded by talent and coaching. So it's hard to predict. I do like Doug Peterson quite a bit. I think he knows what he's doing as well. It's just hard to see what they can be after the travesty of what last year was for them. The Bears, again, I like Justin Fields. I like him a lot. He was my runner-up pick for the Falcons if they weren't going to take Pitts, which is funny because hindsight 2020, if I had known that they were going to get rid of Matt Ryan after 1 year, I would have said take Justin Fields. At the time, I was like, okay, they're going to hold on to Matt for 2 to 3 years, give him a weapon, take Kyle Pitts. But hindsight 2020. But at the end of the day, I do like Justin Fields a lot. I don't know a lot about their coach, to be honest with you. I don't really know what to expect from them. So it's hard for me to sort of project that. I mean, the Bears always have a good defense, so that's always helpful. But at this moment, I can't tell you who their number one wide receiver is.
As a Bears fan, I can't really either. So
reminds me a lot of the Falcons last year, so I feel that pain.
Well, speaking of wide receiver one and pain a little bit, what's the latest that you're kind of hearing on Calvin Ridley? I mean, he's done for the year. I mean, is there a future in Atlanta for him going forward or in the NFL or?
I don't project it to be. I think he's played his last down as a Falcon, but I also could be wrong because I think that there's still a chance, albeit a little one, that he returns to the Falcons to some capacity because I think at the end of the day, I mean, it's a contract year for him and he's not going to be playing. So I think for him, his market has plummeted. No team's going to want to trade for him because what would the Falcons would be stupid to trade an asset for him at this point. Because they'll get like a 7th round pick or something because I mean, he's not going to play, but as soon as he goes somewhere else, he'll probably go back to being Calvin Ridley again. Calvin Ridley's a pretty good wide receiver. So I do think he let them down quite a bit because as a media member, we asked them Calvin Ridley questions every single week. This whole gambling thing came out after the fact. Because every year every week it was always a mental health thing. It was like it still very well could have been. This might have been just something, that he was doing while he was dealing with the whole mental health thing. It's just the optics of it all didn't look good for him. It's not good when you miss a whole season and you cite mental health for it, and then you get cited for gambling. It's like, okay, were you really having mental health issues, or do you have an issue here? So, I'm not going to be one to project what it actually was, but at the end of the day, I know he did let them down because they had to defend him every single week, and they did. I mean, every single week it was like, we support him with what he's doing. We're here for him. We're doing this, but man, it's hard when you do that week in, week out, and he comes out and you find out this happened.
Yeah, I mean, with his talent, I mean, you would hope that he would, catch on somewhere else. But with all of that, yeah, it does seem like there would need to be a change of scenery.
I think so. I mean, I think it'd be best for him. And I don't take these. I think this is just how, the way things are now. But I do think that he doesn't want to be here anymore. I saw tweets, in the middle of all this, he was liking tweets that had him in a Dolphins uniform and doing this, that, and the other. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think he's liking that on purpose because he's a smart guy. He's close to, I think he's a little bit younger than me, if not my age. He knows what he's doing on social media. He's got to know he's one of the biggest wide receivers in the game and people see what he's liking. Like, I don't think he's that stupid. So, I think, yeah, I think change of scenery might be healthy for both parties.
Well, speaking of like storylines, and just wanted to kind of end with what are some storylines that you're watching in training camp this summer?
Well, I think the obvious one is seeing how Ridder progresses. That's the exciting one. He has been exciting in minicamp just because of how quickly he's picked up things. But my boring storyline to watch is the offensive line because they brought in some competition for these guys. And you look at a guy like Jalen Mayfield, who was arguably the worst offensive lineman in football last year, but he was a guy that wasn't supposed to start. He was a guy that started basically by default because of injuries. So I'm excited to see how his development comes along because, man, it takes a lot to get back up and start every single week when you're taking the criticism that he took, rightfully so. But to get back up and still go out there and do it without losing yourself, because, man, I would have lost all ounce of confidence if I was him going out there every week and being basically the worst offensive lineman out there. So I'm really excited to see his progression. Lindstrom, I think, is one of the best offensive linemen in football. Jake Matthews, very consistent. I think you have a mainstay there. I think Lindstrom and Matthews are two anchors you have on that line. But the rest is all up for grabs. At center, you have a pretty big battle between Matt Hennessy and Drew Dahlman. Hennessy he's been so spotty since he's been with the Falcons. He'll have his moments, but then he'll have his moments where you're like, okay, this guy's not a starter in the NFL. They drafted Drew Dahlman last year, so I'm expecting they want to see some competition there. And of course, Jalen Mayfield is going to have some competition now with Justin Schaefer and some of these other guys. So there's a lot going on there. Again, like I said, Caleb McGarry as well. He's in a contract year. He bulked up big time this offseason. I don't know if you saw a picture of him online, but he looks like the Northman out there this year. So he's bulked up. He knows his job's on the line. So it's going to be a pretty interesting competition there on that side of the ball.
When you look at some of the play calling, and are there going to be some keys to throughout training camp and even as the season starts to say, okay, well, now Arthur Smith does trust the offensive line. Like if he doesn't, it might be apparent as far as kind of more of the check downs or things that they're calling as well.
Yeah, I think part of Arthur Smith's offense is going to regardless of how the offensive line plays or not, if they do play badly, I'm sure he'll make some adjustments, but I do think that Arthur Smith's offense this year will be heavily play action involved, heavy rollouts, a lot of that stuff. Maybe we'll see some read type plays, a little bit more of that. Seeing just option type things. Where today's NFL basically. So I think there's going to be a lot more movement in the backfield now than we've seen in quite a while. So that being said, it's going to be weird to see week to week how he changes things because, again, it's all dependent on the results. It's all dependent on if all these guys are just pummeling through the offensive line and getting to Mariota or Ridder, at the snap of the ball. I'm sure they'll go back to captain check down again. But no, I think there's going to be a lot more rollouts designed to give the quarterbacks more time in the pocket, not in the pocket, but more time period to just find some open guys and find, maybe running backs, not even wide receivers. There's probably going to be some packages for the tight ends and the running backs to just almost like extended running plays than it is a pass play. So, only time will tell because it's all dependent on the results.
Well, speaking of results and confidence, I did have a chance draft time to talk to your counterpart in Charlotte, Will Kunkel. And how confident are you that the Falcons are going to have more wins than the Panthers this year?
Actually, pretty confident. I don't think the Falcons will finish last place in this division solely because that their coach is still in place in Carolina. I thought he should have gotten the boot this past year. I think I look at it like Dan Quinn's final year when he was in Atlanta because he should have been fired a year early, but he wasn't. I don't think that he's as good of a coach as Dan Quinn, but at the end of the day, Yeah, I mean, they don't know who their quarterback is right now. Christian McCaffrey has got question marks back there. I wish they would trade Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah.
And I think it would help with their. I think they're going to end up having to trade Christian McCaffrey. This is a team that I think has never accepted a rebuild. Like after Cam left the first time, they never really fully embraced the rebuild. It was always, we're going to keep rolling with this next guy or this free agent. We're going to roll in, and he's going to. They've almost been flatlining for the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't been good nor bad. It's just been sort of like, all right, we're going to stay put right here for a little bit. And I think this season is going to be the breaking point for them where they finally realize, yeah, we need to tear this thing down and build it from the ground up.
As a Bears fan, should I be glad that Dan Quinn's not the coach?
I don't know. It's so hard to. I think he's at his best when he's a defensive coordinator. I think that's proven. I think he's a hell of a coordinator. But I mean, granted, he did take the Falcons to the Super Bowl. The problem with me is I credit more of that to Kyle Shanahan than I do to Dan Quinn. And Dan Quinn, he's a rah-rah guy. If you watched Hard Knocks, what you saw there is very accurate with what he was in Atlanta. Very much the rah-rah guy. He'd come up with these slogans that Falcons fans would just roll their eyes over because they weren't winning at the time. It became sort of a meme almost when he'd say that we're pissed after every time they lose. It's like, how pissed is he this week? So, no, I mean, I have a lot of respect for Dan Quinn. I do like Dan Quinn a lot. He was always very, as far as from a media standpoint, just always very cordial, very great guy. And the players loved him too. So, I mean, I think that says a lot too. I just think maybe he's best suited as a coordinator rather than a coach.
Well, my guy here, Ronnie, weighed in on the Panthers. He said Panthers had a top 10 defense a season ago and really only need their quarterback. He thinks that they could push for a playoff spot. So I feel like there needs to we can try to work out a bet between you and Will there.
Yeah, to that I would say before last season, the Falcons had a pretty good offense too. They had Matt Ryan, they had Julio, they had Calvin Ridley, they had who else they have back there? Man, who'd they have at running back? I think they had a couple guys back there. Devontae Freeman made at the end of his tenure, but they had a pretty good offense too. And now we're where we are now. So take that as you will. That's my perspective on it. I don't know. I think the Panthers team that have not. I will say though, I do like J.C. Horn a lot. I think J.C. Horn is a hell of a piece that they added last year before he got hurt. Yeah, no, I think they've still got a ways to go.
Well, this has been great. I appreciate you coming on. And where can everyone find you again?
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on Twitter. My Twitter is @MilesGarrettTV. That's with an I, not a Y, like the player. I'll be tweeting a lot about the Atlanta Falcons. I'll be gearing up quite a bit in mid-July once training camp starts rolling around. And then every week we have 3 Falcon shows we do at Fox 5. So I'll be doing quite a bit of Falcons coverage for anyone who's interested in seeing that.
Awesome. Thanks again and for joining us. And once again, it's been NFL Outdated Cover 2 series on the Atlanta Falcons. Thanks again, Miles.
Thank you.